All right, well, thank you everyone for taking the time off on a weekday evening to join us for our February edition of the Dallas Fort Worth Power Platform User Group. Today I have Natalie is it Leenders? Did I get that right?
That's very close. Yes, thank you.
How do you spell your name?
Leenders.
Leenders. Okay.
Yeah.
She is a Power Platform analyst based out of Netherlands. She works for the Chimors company, and she has been very active in the community. She has been presenting at several sessions. I think very briefly saw her at the Microsoft Power Platform conference last year, and we have a couple of
Yeah.
mutual friends in the community. And her specialty is creating Power BI dashboards, and she consults in business processes and process improvement use cases for organizations. And we do have a pretty packed user group meeting today. And I will go ahead and do a quick intro of myself. I am Geetha Sivasailam. I am a solutions architect and a Power Platform lead at Artist Consulting, a Microsoft partner based out of Dallas, Texas, and also a business applications MVP. Often try to share my trials and tribulations with the platform, so feel free to follow and connect with me on LinkedIn. And I do have my colleague Ben on the call, and I will let him introduce himself.
Hello, I'm Ben McMahon. I'm a principal at Artist Consulting. I've been with Artist for a little bit over 11 years. I've been able to work very closely with Geetha on numerous projects, both related to the Power Platform and custom application development, as she is wonderful at both. And we are very happy to have everybody here and look forward to this presentation.
Thank you, Ben. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to quickly run through our recent announcements, and then we'll have Natalie talk about her topic, which would be choosing data sources for your Canvas apps and model-driven apps. And then I am going to do a session on OpenAI integration with Power Platform, and we'll open up the forum for Q&A and use the time to share our thoughts, comments, and questions, and just network with our peers. So let's go over to our announcement slides here. Our first announcement there is one of my most favorite announcements that came out this year. That's the pricing cut for AI Builder. For those of you who are new to AI Builder, that is Power Platform's AI capability in the low-code form, where you're able to use AI features to automate document processing or object detection and any of those day-to-day processes and repetitive tasks that you see that would require AI for. You're able to do that in a low-code format within Power Platform using AI Builder. And it's licensed as an add-on to your PowerApps, Power Automate, or your Dynamics 365 license. It also means that you can start using your AI Builder trial if you have any of these valid licenses that allow you to create or work in a Power Platform environment. And recently, they announced changes to their licensing model, making it more accessible for organizations of all sizes. They've reduced the price across a large number of AI capabilities, including document processing. And for a monthly fee, you acquire a service credits. You pay about $500 per month, and you get 1 million credits. And then these credits are then used against your Microsoft's pre-built AI models or your custom models. One example would be your forms processing model. Formerly, it was using 500 credits per page, and now it's been reduced to about 80%. You only consume 100 credits per page, and that's where that cost reduction comes. So be sure to check that out. That is definitely making it AI more accessible for organizations of all sizes. The next announcement that I recently saw come up was the new and simplified left navigation pane. That screenshot over there kind of shows you what the new version looks like. You might probably already see it in your tenants. It's now available to all the makers. So with this new experience, you get to see your most used items pinned to your left nav. You can also customize those items by reordering them based on need. You can unpin them, and from your left navigation pane, you could also discover a list of features that are available to you in PowerApps and so much more. The third item there is the ability to call Dataverse actions directly in PowerFX. So as part of your PowerFX language, which kind of forms your core programming language for Power Platform, especially Power Apps, you're able to now author or invoke Dataverse actions within a formula. So there is a new PowerFX environment language object that authors can now add to their app, and that will allow you to enable access to Dataverse actions. So this is an experimental feature. but it does give you a lot more capabilities that you couldn't do in the past. You would have to rely on Pod Automate, but now you're able to use this to return untyped objects, and you're also able to simply use the dot to return any object properties as well. The last announcement there that I thought would be good highlight for our UG here is the RPA desktop flow activity monitoring. Desktop flows have now broadened the ability to look at how your desktop flow consumption has been in your environments. You're able to monitor it in real time in your desktop flow automation. So there are 3 new pivots that have been enabled for you. You can look at last runs, you can look at your desktop flows by machines, you can also look at your current runs, and they have been added in the past few weeks, so you have more control over your RPA automation. And you're also able to download a Power BI template to monitor your desktop flow activity from Power BI desktop application. So you can use this to retrieve data and charts displayed on the activity page, such as last runs, any errors, and machine information. So that's kind of a roundup on all our announcements that we have seen recently. A quick call out on some events that are happening. We have the Microsoft Power Platform Conference happening in October. Last year was the first one that happened, and this year you have the second edition happening in October in Las Vegas. It's running from October 1st to 6th. The 1st, 2nd, and 6th are workshop days, and then October 3 to 5 are conference days. So if any of you are coming there, let me know if I'm able to make it. I'd love to catch up with you all there. The second one is the Dynamics Con Virtual. This is an event which is put together with Microsoft and the Dynamics user group. They are teaming together and they're providing user-focused content covering Power Platform and a variety of Dynamics 365 products. That's running March 15 to 16, and it's a free event. You're able to register for it and join sessions and learn and network with your peers in this space.
Hey, Geetha, can I ask a question real quick?
Yeah, please.
I apologize. I raised my hand. I didn't want you to get too far away from that first slide. I hate Microsoft licensing with a passion. However, I do want to know if anyone on the call knows on the AI builder pricing cut. One of the things that used to drive me nuts is you had the licenses that you had to use those credits or lose them. Do we know if Microsoft changed that? So in other words, if I didn't roll the credits or use them in a given month, they expired and I had to start over with new credits. I don't know if Microsoft changed that or not.
I have not heard any change on that. I believe it's still the same,
Okay.
but yeah, I can definitely double check on that and see if anything's changed. But yeah, I know it does. It's not very helpful when you purchase credits and you don't really consume them.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
yeah, hopefully we have a better answer soon. All right, next up, we are excited to have Nathalie showcase her session on choosing the right data sources and what best practices to keep in mind when it comes to Canvas apps and model-driven apps. All yours, Nathalie.
All right. Good afternoon or good evening, everybody. Let me start by sharing my screen. Thank you so much for having me. It's a subject that in this past 2 years of working as a Power Platform developer, I have encountered in doing solutions for my end users. So hopefully what I've learned, the mistakes that I've made, I can hopefully protect you from not doing them. So if there's any questions in the meantime, please let me know. After my session, I will drop off because it's currently midnight for me. But if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me through my website, on Twitter, LinkedIn, wherever, and I'm more than happy to help. So can you see my screen? Okay, I see a thumbs up, so I think that's it. Right. So thank you so much, Geetha, for introducing me. Excuse me. So I have been self-taught on InfoPath, SharePoint Designer, Power BI, and I kind of rolled onto the Power Platform. When I first joined IT, there wasn't a Power Platform, so I didn't really think about doing it. But I kind of gradually grown into it, and for the past 2 years I've been working as a developer. So as I mentioned, feel free to check out my Twitter, website, LinkedIn. The QR code leads to my website. So let's get started. So I will be discussing a brief difference of Canvas apps and model-driven apps, just a very slight difference between those two. And unfortunately, I will touch upon delegation, and then different data sources, Excel, SharePoint, Dataverse, SQL, and a few others, and data flows, different types of data, and we will go over it once more at the end. So my point of view is from a developer that has to design a solution for end user or a client. So I will not be touching upon all of the different APIs that are possible, but more on my client needs a data structure. What is my best way to approach this? So let's start with Canvas apps versus model-driven apps. So a Canvas app is fully customizable. It has a lot of freedom, a lot of design freedom, and a Canvas app doesn't have any limitations as far as connecting data is concerned. You can connect Excel, SQL, SharePoint, Dataverse, WhatsApp connector. You can connect all sorts of things, and it is really easy to use low code to develop your Canvas app, and you can expand using code, of course, but it's a really easy way to set up. And the difference with a model-driven app is very data-driven. So a model-driven app is more based on your business process. So there's step 1, step 2, step 3, with different types of business process flows that are possible. You can do field level security. You can see that team A needs to be able to see different types of data or information from team B. And that's kind of the difference. But the biggest difference as far as data is concerned, a model-driven app only allows Dataverse. So there is a slight way around that by using virtual tables, which I will briefly talk about as well. But basically, it's only Dataverse that's been allowed. So for me, in my experience within Commerce, I once had an idea for an app, and nobody told me that a model-driven app only supports Dataverse, and I had set up my entire data backend in SQL. So then they told me, like, yeah, that's not possible. You need to use virtual tables. So then I started going into all of the different data sources and how it all worked. So that's kind of how I'm going through this. Are there any questions on Canvas apps or model-driven apps before I continue?
I don't see any hands raised, but everyone feel free to drop your questions in the chat if you need to, or raise your hands. Nathalie I can always help Nathalie answer those questions.
All right, thank you. So delegation, unfortunately, is something that your data is getting pulled in either a Canvas app or model-driven app. There's a standard limit of 500 items that's being pulled in your app. You can manually set it to 2000. But that's kind of an issue. So if you have, for example, you need to have a data backend of 5,000 items, then by default, your filter or your search, all of your non-delegable functions will only grab those first 500 or your manual 2,000 items. You need to pull it in collections. You need to do all sorts of things around it. So there is a way to go around this by using one of Matt Devaney's articles. It's on using Power Automate to, for example, you have a search box, you type in your search query, Power Automate sees that you've typed in that search query, or at least you will program it to see it, and then it will do the search for you and return the results into your Power App. So it's not your Power App that's doing the search or the filter, but it's actually Power Automate in the backend, and that's how you can bypass delegation. It's not easy. That's also why I put in a QR code for his website. But yeah, that is a way to go around the standard delegation of 500 or 2000 items. Now, my least favorite data source, I call it the elephant in the room, is Excel. Because Excel is technically speaking a data source. You can use it, you can connect to it. However, there's a few pros and cons. Okay, so one of the pros is a lot of companies will have Excel sheets, Excel databases, as they would call it, or Excel lists, and you will be able to connect to it if they are within a table. You can connect to that table if there's no formula, if there's no complicated lookup, if there's nothing special, it's just a very typical table, you will be able to connect and build a Power App on it. However, if that Excel file is open at the exact same time that you want to add something in your Power App, it doesn't work. It will give you a checked out error and it doesn't work. That's also the same with that it's very similar on how Power BI works. If you change something in your Excel, you change the header name, you change something, Power Apps will freak out. So while I say Excel can work as a data source, I don't recommend it. And there are way more pros and cons, or not pros, unfortunately, a lot more cons. So I would definitely say only use it as a last resort if your client really needs to have the data from Excel. But I would kind of say move it over to Dataverse and then build your app on it because of the limitations, and they cannot touch that Excel file once you build something up on it. So that's kind of why I mentioned that it's the elephant in the room. Then there's SharePoint. So SharePoint is I think personally the easiest way to set up a Power App is by using a SharePoint backend. And the reason why I call it the easiest way is that most users or most organizations will already have SharePoint or are interested in getting SharePoint, and they know how to create a list, add permissions, customize columns. So that's why SharePoint is easier to set up and maintain, but also for future maintainability for the end user. So there's no complicated security groups. People can really easily build on it. However, it's not supported in a model-driven app without using a virtual table, of course. It's low in SSO security. So yes, it's SSO, but I wouldn't put any confidential information on there. And when you go onto very large data sets, and I mean over the thousands, there are performance issues with SharePoint. But SharePoint doesn't require a premium license. So if you have a company or a client or end user that is not able to leverage premium licenses, then I would say SharePoint is definitely the way to go. And then there's Dataverse. Dataverse does require a premium license, but as far as setting it up, I would say it's medium, moderate to set it up, because you need to know how security roles work, giving out the permission, excuse me. But you can integrate with Dynamics 365. It is compatible with both Canvas app and model-driven app. It supports a lot of different data types. So Dataverse does work, or of course it works, but that's one of the easier things to also set up. And you can fully customize and go deeper with code, write plugins, integrate different things, combine with Dynamics 365. So it goes a lot deeper. And then SQL. So as I mentioned in the beginning, I'm doing a solution with SQL. So SQL is really good at handling very large amounts of data. different types of tables in the backend that needs to have relationships. You can do dozens of tables, hundreds of tables, and you can work with ADF pipelines to transform the data before it goes into your PowerApps. So there's a lot of different ways to actually work with SQL. However, setting up SQL requires a bit of knowledge. And first of all, you need to have a premium license. You need to have Azure license. You need to have at least SQL knowledge or a SQL database expert to actually set up your table for you. You need to have a service account, or your own account needs to have all of the permissions. So there's a lot more technical things that are needed in the backend. And I'm now just reminding myself, you also need to have a gateway set up, because SQL is on a different area, different networking area, and you need a gateway to connect over to SQL, so that your Power App is able to also use the data. And it's not possible to connect a model-driven app directly to SQL. I found out the fun way that that's not possible, and I'm using a virtual table, which I will talk about in the next slide. But yeah, it's not possible. So a Canvas app can connect to SQL, and it should work. However, a model-driven app, there's just no way, because it only allows Dataverse. So speaking of virtual tables, a virtual table is basically a way for Dataverse to read the metadata of your Excel, SharePoint, or SQL. And using that metadata, it actually translates it to your Power App. So it kind of sees the data, but it doesn't fully bring it into Dataverse. So there's one of the pros of using this is that if there's data within SQL, you don't want to move it over, or there's no budget for migrating it. Excuse me. Then you could use a virtual table to basically link your Dataverse to your backend. So yeah, so that works. There's no additional storage costs because it gets the metadata in. However, there are a few pros and cons. I have 2 slides on cons, and this is not all. So yes, it works with a data connection from your Dataverse. You can set up a virtual entity, and with that virtual entity, you can then connect to your SQL using the gateway. So that works. However, your SQL backend needs to have a GUID column. That GUID column needs to be set as a primary key. That primary key column cannot be used for sorting, because otherwise your data won't be displayed. And you can only create your Dataverse environment, or it will create it for you, with the column types that are supported within SQL. For example, if you want to have a checkbox or a toggle in your app, which is a Boolean isn't supported in SQL. So then within your SQL, you need to convert your column to a bit column, and bit is, I think it's 0, 1, or something, but 0 is false, true, 1 is true, and then it will work for your checkbox. But the other one that I found out that wasn't working, which is all the way at the bottom, which I'm not happy about, because my solution requires me to have about 40 choice columns or choice option sets. Choices aren't supported on virtual tables. So I am trying to work around this by using plugins or completely recoding my model-driven app. But right now, even if you add an additional choice column or an additional choice, you try and map it in your form in your model-driven app, it won't work. It will throw an error that your virtual entity needs to be updated for the option set, but it doesn't work. So that combined with that the business process flows aren't supported, there's no auditing, there's so many different limitations that I would say only use this as a last resort if you don't have a budget to migrate from SQL to Dataverse, or your client has a very specific reason why, and then look at all of the known limitations and then see if it works. Because I currently am very deep in my solution with the development, and it's kind of already gone too far to change the Dataverse, but I'm stuck because the choice columns aren't supported. And Microsoft did tell me last week that they will change the official documentation, because this was not a known limitation before I started doing this project. So make sure that a virtual table will fit for you. And if you want to know more or learn more about virtual tables, there is a Power Champion session tomorrow, and they will talk about all of the capabilities and how it works. But I would say definitely keep these limitations in mind when using SQL for your apps. Then there's data flows. So a data flow, what it is anybody here familiar within Excel with the Power Query tool, or within Power BI, the Power Query tool? Okay, I see thumbs up. All right, so a data flow basically uses the query editor to change or transform your data before it goes into your app. So if you have an Excel table that isn't ready to go into into your Canvas app or your model-driven app just yet, you can use the data flow to transform, promote headers, remove empty values, clean up the data. You can use data flows, and then you can update your data using a Power Automate flow that actually triggers when you modify your Excel sheet or your other data source, and then updates your data flow, and then it updates up to your Power Apps. So that is also a different way. But for example, environment variables cannot be used. There's no file or attachment option. There is a refresh limit. So this is one that I did want to mention, because it is possible to transform data that doesn't fully work yet for your app. But yeah, please keep these things in mind. And I did want to do an honorable mention of Azure Blob. So Azure Blob is very much suited for attachments, for files, for media files, video, and you can use event-based triggers. So ADF pipeline triggers. You can have very high storage. It can handle confidential data, such as confidential PDFs. However, it is a premium connector. It requires Azure knowledge to set up. There's no connection to Excel. It's not suitable for structured data. So any table or relational database, it won't be able to connect. It's purely only for media files and attachments. And there are no relationships possible for data aggregation. So it's only files and attachments, basically. So the different types of data, how I see them, structured, semi-structured, and unstructured. So structured is your relational data or your table or yeah, that. And then there's semi-structured. It can be JSON code. It can be other code that can be identified by a delimiter, so a comma, semicolon, hashtag, those types of things. And then there's unstructured data, meaning social media blog posts, emails, so any data that cannot be recognized by a single denominator, delimiter, anything. And then, of course, my funniest, because I am a Trekkie all the way, is insufficient data. So that's a little bit of a joke there. And then, unfortunately, I do have to touch upon the data privacy. So nowadays, we have to be really careful what type of data is stored where. So data privacy is protected by law. It's called here in the Netherlands, it's the AVG law, and that law requires any PII, personal identifiable. What's the other I?
Information. I think.
Yes, information. Thank you. So that type of information, so whether it's medical records, it's full photo, full name information, driver's license, passport number, any data that can identify you, that data needs to be stored on a local server. So for example, here in the Netherlands, and any PII data needs to be stored within Europe. So my Dataverse environment or my entire solution, everything needs to be stored on a Europe server. So those are things to also take into consideration when looking at different data sources. For example, your SQL database or your SharePoint server, it needs to be on your local country area. And then, of course, users must consent for the information to be stored, and it needs to be documented that they offered their consent. There needs to be checkups. Every single thing you do with that data needs to be monitored and possibly audited. So it's a really tricky administrative solution, but if you don't, then you don't follow the law, and you will put yourself and your client at risk, unfortunately. And I put in a blog post on PII data, what exactly it is, and I think it also has links on how the different types of laws work, but you can also then check that out. And then there's the future maintainability from a client perspective. So let's say you have completed a solution for your end clients or your end user, and what now? So easy to update is a SharePoint list. It's Excel, more or less, and Dataverse. So meaning it's easier to add columns, change permissions on SharePoint, modify any column names, that type of stuff. But SQL backend, virtual table, Azure Blob, data flows, all requires additional IT intervention. So when you have a solution for somebody that you want them to be able to maintain without your assistance, I would say go with SharePoint or Dataverse. But if you have a way for them to have an IT service desk or support, you could go with SQL, virtual tables, Azure Blob, data flows, blah, blah, blah. Then from a developer point of view, so SharePoint, Excel, Dataverse is very easy, as I said, also for us to add on to it. but SQL requires SQL knowledge. So just opening up a SQL database and trying to look at the information that's in your table, it requires you to run a query that you may not know. I think it's select asterisk from this table something, and then there's different ways with virtual tables. Virtual tables require a lot of support. So currently they're quite unstable. They may require remapping, they may break, your gateway may interfere. So virtual tables require a lot of additional IT assistance. And Azure Blob, of course, it's Azure. And data flows, because data flows require Power Automate, and the Power Automate flow might break. So those are also things to take into consideration. And then just to recap, I went through it a little bit fast, but Excel is not premium, easy to set up, works in a Canvas app, slightly works in a model-driven app using a virtual table, but in the end, it is easier to set up. SQL, difficult, because it requires you to have SQL knowledge. It requires you to have a gateway, service account, additional setups, possible virtual table. So SQL, I would say, is the most difficult out of these to set up and maintain. SharePoint, easy for you, for the end user. Doesn't require any premium license. Permissions are easy. Adding onto it is easy. And then Dataverse, Azure Blob, virtual table, moderate to set up, bit of a pickle to maintain, or at least Dataverse is okay, but Azure Blob for virtual tables does require a bit more work to set up and maintain. So that's it. I'm sorry, I went through it quite fast. Are there any questions?
That was great, Natalie. I loved how you had it split by pros and cons, just making it easy for everyone to know exactly what it's good at versus, things that you want to consider if you're going down the road of choosing those data sources. It did give me a good chuckle when you called out Excel being the elephant in the room. It really is. I know a lot of organizations start off with Excel. That kind of is, like their backend data service to use. But then, it's always a good idea to refactor if you see your data growing. Excel is really not a relational database, but the moment you perceive or you anticipate that this is going to grow, that's your perfect time to refactor and choose a more efficient and ideal data store in the back end.
Yeah, definitely. No, I mean, Excel, there's so many companies that still use Excel and still have data stored in there. So for archival data storage purposes, I would say you can connect to it, build your app onto it, but just make sure that you know that nobody can use or modify that Excel file once you started building on it. So archival, sure. Future adding onto it, changing it, I would say move it over to Dataverse, or try and convince your client to maybe even move it over to SharePoint instead of Dataverse, or just to try and get them out of the Excel space. Because yes, technically it is a data source, as I mentioned, but there are so many cons to use it.
Yep, that's a very good point. But thank you so much for sharing all of these invaluable tips and best practices when it comes to choosing the right data source for your Canvas app or model-driven apps. Really appreciate you taking the time on I know it's pretty late for you out there, but we really appreciate you doing this for us.
You're welcome. And as I said in the beginning, feel free to reach out through my website, LinkedIn, Twitter, whichever, and I will be more than happy to help.
What we're going to do next is I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, and we will get started on talking about OpenAI integration with Power Platform. That's our next topic of the day. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat for Nathalie, and then the chat will still be around, so she should be able to answer it when she gets to it the next day or when she has time for it. All right, so OpenAI has been the rage recently. You've probably seen it pop up on your feeds. You've been seeing a lot of folks using OpenAI with Power Platform, or just talking about ChatGPT and on all these AI terminology. So I thought we'd take a step back and go through some of the concepts of AI and leveraging some of those services within the Power Platform. So we're going to look at how AI integration works in the Power Platform and what different tools and avenues you have to leverage those services. And then we are going to get a brief overview of what OpenAI really is and what APIs come underneath that, and what models you can leverage. And then we'll also look at some of the built-in OpenAI features in the platform, like PowerApps ideas, this Power Automate Copilot, and then we'll also talk about how you can use OpenAI outside of PowerApps ideas and the Copilot scenarios. And we'll go through a few demos that I have in place for you to see some quick examples of how you could get creative with using the OpenAI models to solve any business problems or maybe make your business processes more efficient. Okay, now here is just a quick overview of how AI can be infused into the Power Platform, not specifically OpenAI, but just AI in general. You have a bunch of ways to incorporate AI services. The first one over there is Azure AI connectors. You have a portfolio of artificial intelligence services that are designed for developers and data scientists to do more with less. You can take advantage of decades of breakthrough research and AI practices and flexibility that Azure AI offers to build and deploy your own AI solutions. You're able to access high quality vision, speech, language, and decision-making AI models through simple API calls. You can also create your own machine learning models, all backed by Microsoft's responsible AI principles. So in the Power Platform world, these services are enabled as connectors that are available out of the box for you to configure, consume, and start using those results right away. You're also able to use custom connectors if needed, if it is not covered as one of your standard out-of-the-box connectors. There's just a simple visual at the top there that shows you the custom vision connector that's available for you to use. The moment you drop that connector, you just need to configure it with the security settings that you want to use to authenticate to that instance, and you are able to start leveraging the service in the backend to work with your organizational data. The next option there for you to have AI infused into your platform is AI Builder. AI Builder is Microsoft Power Platform's capability that provides AI models that are designed to optimize your business processes. It enables your businesses to use intelligence to automate processes and gain insights from your data in PowerApps and Power Automate. So you don't need to have any coding or data science skills to access the power of AI. You can build custom models tailored to your needs, or you could also choose a pre-built model that's already ready trained for you to use for many common business scenarios. You can quickly simplify tasks using those AI models. And some of the examples that we have today are like prediction, forms processing, this object detection, entity extraction, and then also there are pre-built AI scenarios, which includes key phase extraction, language detection, and sentiment analysis, OCR, business card reader, receipt processing, and so much more. So you are always able to sign up for a trial as long as you have a valid PowerApps, Power Automate, or a Dynamics 365 license that enables you to access artifacts in your Power Platform environments. So that's always a great way to get started with these tools. To be able to use some of your premium features, you can also sign up for the developer tenant that allows you to get your own community plan, which would be your own environment, specifically for sandbox purposes, where you can start using these premium features. The last option, the third option there, is the OpenAI piece. Now, 2 years ago, Microsoft introduced a PowerApps feature that uses GPT-3 technology, which is the OpenAI's text generating system, to create formulas in Power Effects. And Power Automate also has the flexibility today to start with natural language processing, and that uses a codex model, which is the core concept for Microsoft's strategy of enabling everyone to write code. Now, you're not limited to these three options. If you have any third-party AI services, there might already be a connector available for you to use. If not, you could create your own custom connectors to tap into those services, as long as you have a way to authenticate and authorize your tokens in order to communicate with those services. Now, that's just a high-level overview of how AI works in the Power Platform in general. But in today's session, we're going to focus on OpenAI, and we're going to talk about how that can fit into the Power Platform ecosystem. There's the link at the top there. That's the platform.openai.com/overview. That's a pretty good place for you to go look at how OpenAI works, what it really does. And then you're also able to sign up for an API key. You create a login, you can generate a key, and you do get a about $18 in free credit for you to use, for you to be able to use those tokens as part of any API calls that you want to use for free, just to play around with it. And if you feel like you want to use it in a production scenario, you can always upgrade and buy a pricing based on a pricing tier that would best fit your needs. OpenAI is an AI research and development company. Their mission is to ensure that artificial intelligence benefits all of humanity. There are various AI-powered programs and machine learning algorithms that they've built. It uses these algorithms to train the AI systems, and it can be applied virtually to any task that involves understanding or generating natural language or code. They're developed, trained, and deployed in real-world settings using OpenAI technologies. And you do have a variety of services and tools and use cases that can consume these services to assist companies, developers, and even students in implementing AI capabilities. Developers are able to use OpenAI's APIs, and they can build applications using the different models that have already been trained for them. Now, one of the most common model, which is a pre-trained model that you would see being used, or you've seen or you've heard, is the GPT-3 model. It's the Generative Pre-trained Transformer 3. That's what GPT-3 stands for. And that is the largest and most powerful natural language processing model ever created. And it can generate human-like text from a few words or phrases. It can be used for a variety of tasks, like natural language generation. It can answer questions, summarization, translation, and more. It's a very powerful tool for developers and researchers, since it can generate accurate and meaningful results based on a natural language input very quickly. And so OpenAI's GPT-3 has been trained with a considerable amount of historical data from the internet that goes up to 2021. It has close to 175 billion machine learning parameters, so that you could tell like how well it's been trained and those algorithms are efficient. There are a couple of models there. We've talked about GPT-3. The other models are Codex is a model which is a descendant of GPT-3, and it has been trained on both natural language and using billions of lines of code. But it's most capable in Python, and it's proficient in over a dozen languages like JavaScript, Perl, PHP, TypeScript, SQL, and even Shell. We do have another model called DAL-E, which allows you to generate or manipulate images. So you can create images based on a text prompt. You can create variations for an existing image or edits for an existing image based on a new text prompt. Now, you do have one other model, which is called the fine-tuning model, which lets you get more out of your models available through the API. So you're able to customize a model for your application. You can train more examples that can be fit into a prompt, and then you can prepare and upload your training data, and that way you have a more fine-tuned model that you can use for your scenarios. There are several benefits to using OpenAI. It is open source. It can be used as a way to learn how to code. You can also use it as a co-pilot to rewrite code for efficiency. You can also use it to help generate commentary for content or summarize content. You can also have a way for you to use that to explain how code has been built. Like, for example, you could drop in a PowerApps expression and ask ChatGPT to explain how it's, what does that PowerApps expression mean? And it does a pretty decent job of breaking it out for you in a way so you know what's going on in that expression. But any technology, there are challenges. So you do want to keep a couple of things in mind. This is still AI trained based on data that it has. And so there's always that element or factor of due diligence that you would have to do before you start implementing them. It may not always be the most accurate because it's relatively new. And you also want to ensure that those AI systems are safe and reliable. And you want to keep in mind that these are always vulnerable to manipulation and exploitation of the data based on the prompts that you provide. So it's always a good idea to use that as a reference when you are using any of these models to generate data, but make sure that you do your due diligence before you start using them in your production scenarios. I am going to quickly stop there to see if we have any questions. All right, I do not see any questions at this point. I will move on to our next slide here. All right, so now we're going to kind of take a look at where do we have OpenAI already incorporated in the platform. These are things you may have already used, maybe you've seen them, but here's where OpenAI has already been wrapped up and exposed for you to use. Number one thing is PowerApps Ideas. This is an AI-powered assistant that allows you to create apps using a natural language. So the ultimate low-code app building experience is where you describe in plain language what you want an app to do, and in an instant, the app is created for you. So GPT-3 and other Microsoft AI technology have been, been implemented directly into the PowerApps Studio in a way that will help every maker quickly build apps they need and more easily learn advanced concepts in the process. So this is called PowerApps Ideas, and you are able to, simply tell PowerApps what you would like to see. For example, in this visual that we see at the bottom, it is asking AI to show customers from the US whose subscriptions have expired based on the gallery of items that you have. And a set of formulas are presented along with an explanation of how they work. So now you're able to pick which ones you would want to use and apply them and get started. There's also another ability that this feature allows, which is called programming by example. It uses the AI technology known as PROS, which stands for Program Synthesis Using Examples. Microsoft has a very strategic collaboration with OpenAI, the developers of GPT-3, and also they can apply these models to products like PowerApps. You're able to fine-tune the GPT-3 model to understand how PowerApps formulas are constructed, and we can leverage the model's existing strengths in a natural language input to give PowerApp makers the ability to describe logic just like they would to your peer or a coworker in the space. And we will take a look at as part of our demos of how you can use that and how helpful it is. Next is the Power Automate Copilot. This is also one other OpenAI feature, which is a very good way to get started with using OpenAI in your processes. So when you build automation with Power Automate, it could take time to learn what actions you would want to use, what kind of trigger would be the best way to get your Power Automate Cloud Flows to get executed, especially if you're very new to Power Automate. So if you want to just jump right in and get started, you could write a description of what you want to automate in a natural language. And Power Automate will use OpenAI Codex model to translate that description into code, and then it'll give you the corresponding flow that you could start creating instantly and using. And so we'll take a look at a quick demo of that as well. But a couple of limitations to keep in mind. Power Automate supports descriptions written in English language only. You could write descriptions in other languages. It might work, but they're not fully supported. And Cloud Flows are the only type of flow that you can create from a description. And the current version may not always fill in parameters automatically, like even if you provide them in the description, that would be something for you to keep an eye out when you start using this technology to generate flows automatically. Now, the AI model that transforms a description into a cloud flow is optimized to automate main actions for a couple of connectors like Microsoft Excel, Forms, Microsoft 365 Outlook, there's OneDrive for Business, Planner, Teams, SharePoint, and I believe approvals and Microsoft Dataverse as well. Now I am going to pull over some examples so we can take a look at how you could use PowerApps ideas and the Power Automate Copilot to describe it and let AI build your flows. Let me go ahead and pull over my Power App here. So this is one of the template apps that we have. This is the customer success template, and this is our home screen where I have a gallery with customers listed. And what I want to do is, oops, I had it open for way too long. Let's give it a second here so it can load. And what we're going to do is click on that gallery, go over to PowerApps Ideas, and see how we can ask a question to PowerApps Ideas, which would be a question to OpenAI GPT-3 models, and have that generate some formulas for us. Another thing to keep in mind, PowerApps Ideas and Power Automate Copilot are currently a preview feature. So you should expect to use it for sandbox scenarios. Normal recommendation is to not use that for production scenarios, especially if you have any critical data that you're working with in your business use cases. Okay, the way to get to PowerApps Ideas at this point in time will be to select your gallery control, and then under your properties pane, you will see a third tab called Ideas. And that is where you see a couple of examples that it already shows, and you can also provide feedback if you want to improve how Ideas has been working. So what I'm going to do is right now I have this gallery sorted by the created on. It is sorted by the created on field depending on when this item was created. Let's take a look at the table itself. So we have a bunch of properties here, and you can see, it's got the email, the names, the phone, and addresses, and things like that. So we can now, let's ask PowerApps Ideas, which should be OpenAI, about an example for what if you want to sort by the customer name. So when I start typing in customer, you'll notice that it is smart enough to know that this gallery is using the customer's object to populate the data, and it knows what columns are available. So I am going to use that to say I'm going to switch that to sort by customer name. And when I do that, it is showing me how I could sort by customer name. It shows me a formula which says you can sort your gallery by passing in your customer name and then the order that you want to use. So I could, if you actually go back here, you will notice, let me go back and pull up the customer name field. So in my gallery, even though we have a customer name, I am using a field that is very specifically the name field. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to my gallery, and I am going to say I want to use the name field to sort it by, because that's what I'm using in my gallery. So let's give it a couple of minutes. We should see it, and then it did a pretty good job of actually giving me an exact expression of what it should be like. Now this could be used as a way for you to learn how to do things. Now I'm going to go ahead and apply this. Let's do a quick application. So you do see that we now have it sorted by name, and let me minimize this. Excuse me, I had something tickling in my throat there. But you do see that it did apply that expression right away. And we do have it already sorted by our customer name, and it's sorted in ascending order. So you can see that it did change the order, and I have all of it working. Now let's try another example. This was just using PowerApps Ideas to generate code for us, so you can use that and just implement that and start using your PowerFX expressions that PowerApps Ideas generate as part of your app building tasks. So I'm going to try one more thing. What if we want to change the format for the phone numbers listed here? So let's go ahead and find that text box. Here's the text box that I have, and I can see that not all of them are formatted the right way. And then I do have it referencing the phone field. So you do have another option of using ideas to generate expressions by example. So instead of you prompting PowerApps ideas on what you want, you could just click on a specific field and provide an example of how you would want that to be formatted, and then it will generate ideas of what expression do you need to use to match that format. So now let's say I'm going to give this example of saying I want to format it in the regular phone number format, and then let's go ahead and say get ideas, and it already generated the entire expression for me. You can see that it was smart enough to know that, it follows the format that I provided, and it already has the expression generated. So now I was able to use PowerApps ideas to help me based on an example that I provide, and that's the programming by example model that you can use as part of ideas. What I'm going to do is go ahead and hit apply, click on it. So there it is. So I didn't have to write a single line of code, but I just relied on PowerApps ideas to generate code for me, which is a PowerFX expression that I can use just by providing an example. And you'll notice that it actually did convert those first two in the right way. Now, the other ones already had the dashes in them, so it appended another dash, but that would be for us to add that logic in place. Like if it's already formatted, you don't have to apply this, but if it is not, then it does a pretty good job of formatting the phone numbers. So that was a quick example of how you could use PowerApp ideas to help your app building experience. Let's go over to flows. So I can show you how you can use Power Automate Copilot. Let's go ahead and use our and do our create flows, and then you'll notice that we have a section here called the describe it to design it. So this is what we're going to use. Let's go ahead and click on that, and you notice that here it does tell you that it's a preview feature, and then it also lists out the connection that it currently does support. Now, one of the most common examples that we've seen is copying data. So let's try describing what I want my flow to do, and then we'll see what OpenAI does. So I have some text here that I already typed out, so I am going to paste that. So what I want to do is copy all rows from an Excel file to another file with the click of a button, and that's what I want to do. And let's go ahead and before I hit the next button, I want to show you that I have two SharePoint lists. I already have an Excel sheet with about 3 rows. I have all these columns, but every time I see a file or, I want to be able to move the data into my master source, which lives in another list, which is my PowerApps SharePoint site, and I have a document library, and here is my master inventory list, which is empty. At the moment, I do not have any data, but here's where I want to keep track of all this data. So let's go ahead and create our flow. I'll close out our Excel sheets here, and then let's go ahead and hit the confirm button, and let's wait for it. And you see that it already does a pretty good job of suggesting what my trigger needs to be and how I need to lay out my actions. And here is my suggested flow that's already built out for me. I didn't have to create anything from scratch. Now, you're also able to say that this is not what you're looking for if you feel like it did not meet your requirements, and then you're able to provide feedback if needed. And you could start flow from blank. But this meets my requirements perfectly, so I am going to go ahead and hit next. Now, as part of it, it did identify that I need an Excel online business connector, so you are able to see that. But I already had the connection built as part of some other flows, so it identified the connection and it's already created. But if not, it would ask you to set that up. So I'm going to go ahead and hit next, and now it's asking me to configure these actions because it doesn't know, we didn't give it enough information, and it doesn't necessarily populate all the parameters either. So let's go ahead and pick our SharePoint site where we have our target file. And I'm going to pick my documents library, and I have to pick a file. Let's go ahead and pick that. I'm going to say this is my inventory list. And I can see that my Excel table had an inventory list table. So I'm going to say that's the table that my flow needs to be looking at, list all the rows in that table, and then start adding them to my table in a new Excel sheet on another SharePoint site. So let's go configure our target site here. That is going to be my PowerApps SharePoint site, same documents library, and let's pick our master inventory list. And I'm going to pick a table. I do have a table. And there's one thing to remember when you work with the Excel Online Business Connector, it does need tables to be able to access that data. So you would have to have all your data formatted in a table. That way the connector can read and perform any CRUD operations that you would want on that data source. All right, now that I have it configured, let's go ahead and create the flow. Notice that it already created one. I am going to say this is my ChatGPT demo 001. And you'll notice that it already dropped my trigger. So it already knows that because I said at the click of a button, it knows it's a manual trigger. We already configured our Excel action to list all our rows from our target table. And then it also has the primary required parameters configured as part of our destination table where all of the data needs to go to. But it doesn't know what fields to pull in because we have not defined that as part of our description, but you are always able to pull that as you have those dynamic properties already available for you to use within Power Automate. What I'm going to do is just pick about 3 of them just to show you how it works, and go ahead and pull in our description fields as well. So we only have our inventory ID. I'm supposed to pick our name field and the description for now. I am going to go ahead and save this. So all you had to do was just describe what you want your flow to do, and it did a fantastic job of generating what that Cloudflow needs to do. And this is all OpenAI Codex doing the magic behind the scenes. And all I had to do as a flow maker was just go make sure that I have the right connections and that I configure my actions to do the right thing. Now let's go ahead and test this. And then once that runs, we should be able to open up our destination Excel file and see that our data has been moved. Let's give it a quick, all right, it already did run. So, there were 3 rows. So let's go over to our list here. This is our master inventory sheet. And if I open that, it only did 1 row, but maybe let me see if I can refresh it. Sometimes Excel does, yeah, there we go. It just takes a while because it's still updating the file. But there are 3 rows, and these were the only 3 fields that we populated: the inventory ID, the name, and the description. And it did a pretty good job of bringing all of that over because we have it configured that way. So that was a very quick example of how you could use your Power Automate Copilot to generate a flow based on the description that you provide. And I don't know if any of you have used that before. Has anyone used OpenAI before, or your Power Automate Copilot before? All right. Hopefully this tempts you to try some of the new stuff that's already available for you to use, and I am looking forward to hearing what you guys use it for. Now, the next example that I have here is we've looked at how OpenAI has been already infused as part of the platform and is available for you to use in the form of ideas and Power Automate Copilot. But what if you want to go beyond that? You want to use ChatGPT in a use case that's not associated to ideas, but just something that you would want to use or leverage those OpenAI models to be able to have efficiency in your business processes. So I am going to open up my Power App here. I have a help desk Power App. This is one of the templates, and I've just extended it to use a ChatGPT instance. What the use case here is we have employees using this app to submit help desk tickets. But what if they can ask ChatGPT to help them in case of an issue that they have? And if that doesn't help them, then they can submit a ticket. If not, ChatGPT should be able to help them for most part of it. So let's go ahead, and I am going to go ahead and log in as my help desk user, and let's go and create a new ticket. Now what I have here is a button at the bottom that says Ask ChatGPT, because that way I can choose if I want to create a ticket, or do I want to first check if there is help available from AI to resolve the issue that I have before creating the ticket. Now I already have some of the values hardcoded here just to speed up our demo. But before we get into that, I want to show you something. We do have, see if I can pull a data source. Oh, I'm not seeing my data instances. I was hoping to see a string. Let's see if it let me. We have settings. I am not seeing my button to add a data source. I was seeing it this afternoon. So let's just start insert. Interesting. I'm not even seeing my data connection here. Let me see if I have any. Let me go back and come back to this again before we we go ahead and open my app here. I've noticed that sometimes my ribbon doesn't work. Well, could be that it's just missing that ribbon item. We'll try and reopen it so I can show you how you can use OpenAPI, not OpenAI in your instances, leveraging the OpenAI APIs. Yeah, okay, there it is. All right, here is our ad data. So one of the first things that you would want to do if you want to leverage ChatGPT is to be able to make a call to the API. And for that, we have a community member who's already created an OpenAPI, OpenAI independent publisher connector that leverages those OpenAI APIs. And I already have one created, but I can show you how you can do one. You could go search for OpenAI, and then you see that there is an OpenAI independent publisher. We have Robin. He has already created that for us, so we are able to leverage the connector and start consuming OpenAI models directly and not have to create our own connector or not have to make those HTTP calls. So he's already done the good work of wrapping that up, so you could just start using your connector by passing an API key. Now here I am using that connector. This is a independent publisher connector. So you as a community member are able to build connectors and publish it. And Microsoft goes through the process of validating those connectors. And then once it's pushed out, anyone else in the Power Platform ecosystem can use those independent publisher connectors. The one requisite for this is for you to be able to provide an API key. And the way you provide an API key is to type in the text bearer. Let's see if I can get that to, and then you provide a space. LastPass, I have LastPass enabled, so that's why it's doing that. But you would type in bearer and then space and then drop in your API key. Now, the way for you to get your API key would be to go to your OpenAI API platform, which is the platform.openai.com, and you can sign up for a login. And then once you sign up, you're able to view API keys, and you're also able to create a new secret key. Now you can look at your usage as well. Like for example, you do have a credit of $18 that you can use for free as part of your trial usage. And then you could start leveraging that API key for your OpenAI instances as you're playing around with the tool and validating the features. Now let's go back to our app here. I already have the connector set up, and so that's what I wanted to show you. And early on, I was missing the add data ribbon item, but now that it shows up, let's go ahead and play this here. Okay, I will go ahead and say I'm having printer issues. And then I do want to ask, how do I connect my PC to a wireless printer? Let's say I have an issue with that and I want to see what options are available, or what are suggestions that OpenAI would suggest if I were to look for a resolution for this issue. Now, before I click that button, let's see what we have going on that button. So here is our call to that independent publisher. I'm using a variable so I can capture the output of that response and store that. And we're using the DaVinci 003 model. That's one of the most powerful models that you have out there. You are able to use that to do any of your text completion based calls. And I want to go back to your documentation to show you that quickly. Let's go ahead and see if I can go. Yeah, so that specific model does use the completions endpoint, and this is the documentation on the OpenAI platform. You are able to use this to make calls as needed. Now, there are a couple of properties here that you see. It does a pretty good job of explaining what each one is. The prompt is the most important one, where you're passing in what you're prompting AI to help you with. And then you also want to specify your max tokens, because that's the maximum number of tokens that you can use to generate as your completion returns a payload. So there's some good write-up on how tokens work, and then that way you get a good idea of what your usage would be like, especially if you're doing your trial usage. Now let's go back to our Power Automate here, and the connector itself has a reference for you to show you how you want to pass those arguments. And I am the first property there is the engine, which is the text DaVinci 003. We already have that. And then we are going to pass our text, whatever we have in the description field, we're going to pass that as a prompt. And then I am passing in 1,000 tokens so that I can get, I can get the maximum of that output coming from OpenAI in my response. So we already have that, and I'm actually setting that in my variable, which is called AI response. And then once that's set, I am also making a call for a variable which will be used to show a pop-up label with the response from AI. So let's go ahead and ask ChatGPT, and then you'll notice that it's actually processing at the top. Let's give it a couple of seconds, and it actually did pull a response from ChatGPT, and it actually gives me a pretty good set of instructions on how I should connect to a wireless printer. So I can try these settings, and if that works, I would not need to create a ticket, but if it doesn't, I can create a ticket. So that was a very quick example of how you could incorporate ChatGPT in your business scenario, in this case, which is an help desk app. One other thing I do want to show is how the output is generated. So let's go back to our API, the response from the API. So here's how that value came back. It's got an ID, it shows you the model name that was used, and in the very end, you have one that says choices. That is it's in the format of a table, and that is what stores your data. It is usually in a table format, and there is a property called text, and that's what you need to be using to populate that data. And then I will show you how we are using that to display our content. So let me go ahead and do that call again, just so it will pull those response. All right. And then now here, you notice that it came up with a different response. I had 5 steps, and now it has about 7 steps. So it does modulate. That's something to keep in mind when you're using ChatGPT. I mean, it doesn't vary a lot, but it does have different responses that it can generate for the same question. Now, let me go ahead and show you how we're getting the text response. So since that's a table, we just want to get the very first entry in that table, and we are looking to get the text property, and that is how we're seeing the actual response back from ChatGPT. So that was an example of how you can use it in PowerApps. So we were able to leverage ChatGPT to proactively help an end user to solve an issue prior to creating a ticket in our help desk scenario. Now, I do want to show you another example of using ChatGPT for error handling in Power Automate. So what I want to do is, let's say you have APIs or legacy systems that have APIs in the backend, and you are making calls to the APIs. What if those APIs return error codes and you want to notify your Power Platform admin or maybe even the stakeholder in the process saying that, hey, this is an error code and it could possibly mean this if the error code matches a certain number. So in this case, I am just looking for any error codes that are not 200, and I'm going to pass that error message that the API is sending me back to ChatGPT so it can provide a suggestion on what that error code really means. And I'm going to email the user, which would be myself for the demo, on what the error code actually means. So I already have an API endpoint that I have configured. I've mocked it up for now, but you could leverage any other API as long as you have a response payload coming back. And then that response payload that we get back has two properties, code and message. It gives us the status code, and then also gives us what's the message. And then as part of the flow, I am checking if that code is not 200. Then I want to pass that response to the message to ChatGPT to get the value and then email me with what those responses. And then here there is a compose action because how we talked about how ChatGPT 3 relays your response payload in the form of a choices object, which is the table. So I do have an expression there that I'm using to grab the very first item in that choices table and then grab the text property and pass that output in my email. Then let's look at the action itself. Now, this is using the same independent publisher connector that Robin created, which is a custom connector that you can use to make a call to ChatGPT 3. And there are a couple of engines that you can leverage. For our purpose, I am using the DaVinci new, which is the 003 version. And then I'm also passing in what I want to prompt OpenAI for. So I'm going to say explain error and then pass in the message. So that way it can generate what it thinks that error means, and that can be emailed to the user. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and run a quick test. Let's give that a couple of seconds there to run it, and then I should have an email pop up shortly. It's still running. All right, so I think I'm going to, yeah, it did run successfully. So let's look at what we sent. The response from my API is that it's a 407 error code. And then I do have my message that says proxy authentication failed. And then I'm also using parse.json to get those properties so that I can use them as dynamic properties in my actions underneath the parse.json. And then here I was able to pass that property, which is the message. And we do have a response that came back. It has a pretty good response of what it thinks proxy authentication failed means, and it sent an email. So I'm going to go ahead and pull my email here. Here is my email, and this is a text that I already had hard-coded, but this is the dynamic portion. So this is what ChatGPT said, saying that, just giving an explanation of what proxy authentication failure means. And this way, this is just a creative way for you to use ChatGPT to proactively help your admins or your stakeholders to understand what certain error means so they can take the next step in resolving those actions. So that was just a very quick example of how you could use ChatGPT to handle errors, specifically in the case of leveraging any API calls to your backend systems and being able to proactively work with those errors. And I hope you all enjoyed those demos, and I will take a quick pause to see if there are any questions or any comments there. Awesome. Well, I hope this was helpful, and I hope this helped you understand how OpenAI integrates with Power Platform, the different options that you have today to leverage AI services. And you're not just scoped to OpenAI. You have Azure AI services. You have AI Builder. You could also build your own custom connector. And Our last part of the session was focused on just showing you PowerApps ideas, Power Automate Copilot, and then also 2 examples, one for the app and one for Power Automate to show you how you could leverage an OpenAI endpoint, which would be a text completion model, to generate some responses for you based on a prompt. I really hope everybody enjoyed this, and I am looking forward to seeing you all at our next UG event. If any of you are not registered for our UG, that's our link to our UG on the Microsoft portal. Feel free to register so that way you're notified and you can stay up to date on our upcoming events. And as always, we really appreciate all your support for the user group, and we really hope to see you guys next time. And we should be meeting every month virtually, at least for now. So there should be one coming up in March as well, which we will post closer to the first couple of weeks in March.